Brenda Whitmore's piercing voice slices through the calm of morning. "Get off of there! That's private property." She's shouting at a black man in fatigues, quietly fishing off his own dock. Her teenage son, Kyle, shrinks behind her. Embarrassed. "This is my cabin, ma'am," replies Darius Mitchell evenly, not even bothering to turn around. The sharp diesel fumes from Brenda's speedboat mingle with the warm scent of his coffee. "Lies. I'm calling the police right now." 20 minutes later, gravel spits under the tires of a patrol car. Officer Johnson strides toward Darius, hand resting on his weapon. "Sir, step away for—" He stops cold. His eyes drop to the tackle box, where a polished brass plate reads, "Major General D. Mitchell, U.S. Army." Johnson's face drains of color. He straightens instantly, snapping a salute. "Yes, Major General." Then, turning to Brenda, "Ma'am, you just summoned the police on a decorated war hero at his own property." Brenda's jaw flaps open and closed like a fish out of water. "What would you do if someone called the cops on you at your own home?" Drop a flag emoji for where you're watching from. 2 months earlier, Darius Mitchell had rumbled up this very gravel road in a U-Haul carrying everything he owned. 3 decades in uniform, 4 combat tours, and a Bronze Star had led him here, to this long-awaited peace. His grandfather's fishing cabin waited like an old friend, the cedar shingles weathered to mist gray, standing on 2 acres of prized lakefront, the largest grandfathered lot on Clearwater Lake. Grandpa Joe had bought the place back in 1944 with GI Bill money, back when the lake was a humble fisherman's retreat. Now, Riverside Estates had grown up around it, 40 upscale cabins for weekend doctors and lawyers, but Darius had inherited more than land. Sarah's death 2 years ago, cancer, stealing her too soon, had left him empty, going through the motions until retirement finally cut him loose. No children, no close family, just memories baked into pine walls and the faint scent of his grandfather's pipe tobacco still clinging to the corners. That first week was perfect. He replaced rotting boards on the dock, each hammer strike ringing. Across the water, he repainted the cabin in its original deep green, Grandpa Joe's color. The physical labor was grounding, honest, and healing. Then came the knock. Brenda Whitmore stood at his door like a real estate ad in human form. Platinum bob, designer lakeware, smile honed sharp enough to cut. Behind her loitered Kyle, 16, uncomfortable, clearly dragged along. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped in a glass-shattering voice. "I'm Brenda Whitmore, HOA president. Just wanted to address a few issues." She handed him an official-looking paper. Unauthorized structural modifications. Riverside Estates, HOA. Darius scanned it, coffee still bitter on his tongue. A $500 per day fine for repairing his dock and repainting without prior approval. "Ma'am, this cabin's been grandfathered in. Been in my family since 1944. "Oh, sweetheart." Her smile never faltered. "That old grandfather clause doesn't really mean much anymore. We've updated our community standards. Can't just have people doing whatever they please." The way she emphasized people made Kyle wince. The boy clearly knew better than his mother. "The fines begin today," she pressed on. "But of course, if you find this community isn't a good fit, I do have clients eager to buy lakefront property. Prime development potential." Darius felt that old, steady calm settle over him, the same one he carried into combat zones. His voice was measured. "I'll be holding onto the cabin, ma'am." Her smile cracked, just for a second, revealing something colder beneath. Then it snapped back in place. "Come along, Kyle." As they walked off, the boy glanced back, with quiet apology in his eyes. Good kid. Wrong mother. That evening, Darius sat on the dock, watching the lake catch fire under the setting sun. Loons called in the distance, the same sound Grandpa Joe had cherished. In his memory, Sarah's voice whispered, "Some battles choose you, Darius. The question is, are you still willing to fight them?" He lifted the violation notice, snapping a photo of it with his phone. 30 years of military red tape had taught him one thing: document everything. The paper felt flimsy in his hand, but the weight behind it was heavy. This wasn't about paint or dockboards. It was about power, territory, belonging. From the deck next door, his neighbor Martha Kowalski gave a cheerful wave. A sweet Polish grandmother, maybe 80, who'd lived in her family's cabin since the 60s. She'd brought him a casserole his first day and shared stories of his grandfather's legendary fish fries. "Everything all right, dear?" she called. "Just getting acquainted with the neighbors, Martha," he replied. The old woman's face tightened with anger. "That Whitmore woman giving you trouble? She's been nothing but poison to this community since the day she moved in. Drove the Hendersons out last year with all her HOA garbage." Darius filed the detail away. The Army had trained him to track patterns, isolated incidents versus coordinated campaigns. This was beginning to feel like the latter. When night Settled over Clearwater Lake, Darius fixed himself a plain meal and sketched out his next steps. People often confused patience with weakness. They were about to learn the difference. The following morning delivered another uninvited guest, a county inspector, clipboard in hand and confusion on his face. Jim Rodriguez had spent 15 years in this line of work, and he'd never been sent out for anything this absurd. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm here about unapproved dock modifications." He gestured toward the harmless board replacements. "Honestly, sir, I don't get it. This is routine upkeep. Maybe $50 worth of lumber." Across the street, Brenda crouched in her white Mercedes, camera with a telephoto lens aimed like she was running a bargain bin spy op. The rising sun caught her windshield, scattering little rainbow sparks that might have been pretty if they weren't so sad. "Who reported it?" Darius asked, savoring the bite of his coffee. "The HOA president. 6 calls this week about your property alone." Rodriguez dropped his voice. "Dock repairs, house paint. Even said your American flag was oversized. Between you and me, I served 2 tours with the Guard. That a bronze star plate? Afghanistan 2009? Darius gave a nod. The inspector's posture shifted immediately. "My nephew was with the 82nd Airborne. Appreciate your service." His gaze flicked toward Brenda's amateur surveillance post. Ma'am might want to check her facts before tangling with decorated vets. But Brenda wasn't backing off. She doubled down. That afternoon, her latest Facebook blast hit the Riverside Estates group. Safety alert. New neighbor acting aggressive toward community leadership. Refuses to respect established rules. Concerned for our children's safety. 3. Angry face reactions trickled in, plus one baffled comment from someone's grandmother asking what aggressive behavior even meant. Kyle had tapped like by mistake, then unliked it seconds later. The digital version of a Freudian slip. By evening, Brenda escalated with a noise complaint. The sheriff's deputy who showed up scanned the calm lakeside view like he'd been dispatched to investigate a unicorn sighting. "Got a report of construction noise during work hours? You doing any hammering?" "I just replaced 3 loose deck boards around noon," Darius said. The deputy's radio squawked with real emergencies. Domestic dispute, possible break-in, actual police work. "Well, that's completely legal. Sorry for the trouble." Once the deputy left, Darius settled onto his deck to strategize. The military had taught him that paperwork warfare followed strict rhythms. His old sergeant used to say, if they hit you with forms, you hit back with better forms. That's when he remembered a lesson from his divorce lawyer. HOA transparency laws. Any homeowner could demand full financial records within 10 business days. Corrupt boards usually crumbled under scrutiny. Sunlight was the best disinfectant. That night, he drafted the request with deliberate precision. Decades of military reports had honed his command of exact language. While he waited for Brenda's predictable attempt to stall, he mounted security cameras around the property. The quiet whir of the lenses adjusting brought back the steady reassurance of base security systems. The following evening, Martha showed up with a warm apple pie, cinnamon and butter mixing with the scent of pine. "Your granddad would be proud," she said, settling into the porch rocker. "Joe never let neighborhood bullies win either. Now, tell me about these other families she's pushed out." Martha's grip on her coffee mug tightened. "The Hendersons, young couple expecting a baby. She fined them over mailbox height, lawn length, even how they parked in their own driveway. Piled on so many penalties they sold for half of what the house was worth." The outline sharpened. In Darius's mind, anyone else? "The Kowalskis, elderly couple on Pine Street. Not related to me. She claimed their bird feeders drew vermin. Hit them with $200 daily fines. They couldn't afford food, let alone lawyers." Darius recognized the pattern instantly. Isolate the vulnerable, smother them with bureaucratic pressure, force financial surrender. Classic asymmetric warfare, just the civilian version. But Brenda Whitmore had made one fatal mistake. She had brought in someone who truly knew how to play dirty. The following morning, Kyle jogged past while Darius sat with his coffee ritual. The boy slowed, torn emotions plain on his face. "Morning, Kyle." "Hey, Mr. Mitchell." The kid's eyes carried the heaviness of unspoken family truths. "I'm sorry about my mom. She gets intense when she feels someone's questioning her authority. Not your burden, son." Kyle glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "Since Dad left, she's changed. Always angry. Obsessed with this huge development project. She says it could set us up for life. Keeps talking about clearing obstacles from the prime, lakefront lots." There it was, the real motive. This wasn't just personal harassment, it was profit-driven. Brenda was clearing properties for development clients, cashing in fat commissions and destroying lives in the process. That afternoon, she responded exactly as expected to his request for financial records. Denied, calling it baseless harassment. A volunteer HOA leader's wrong move. Darius filed a state oversight complaint immediately, his hands moving with the same sharp rhythm he'd carried from military service. His grandfather had taught him patience while fishing. Sometimes you wait all day, then strike at the exact right second. And now the cameras caught it all. Every violation notice, every creeping drive-by, every midnight secret reconnaissance, Brenda thought was hidden. Game on. 3 days later, Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting. The community center smelled like scorched coffee and unease as residents wandered in, confused about what could possibly be so urgent on a Tuesday night. Brenda had suited up for battle. Power suit, fresh blowout, and a salesman's smile sharp. Enough to move swampland to tourists. She planted herself behind the podium like a general commanding troops. Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have serious security issues to confront. Her voice carried that piercing edge that could make dogs cower. Recent violations of community rules threaten our property values and family safety. She launched into a PowerPoint presentation that looked like something middle management would frame with pride. I'm proposing emergency rule changes. From now on, all property modifications must have pre-approval, grandfathered status included. The room shifted uneasily. Almost everyone had a grandfathered property. That history was part of what made Riverside Estates unique. And further, Brenda said, eyes narrowing on Darius in the back row, I recommend a retroactive $5,000 fine for unauthorized improvements. Some people, she said pointedly, believed old deeds exempted them from community standards. That's when Martha rose, 80 pounds of fierce Polish grandmother energy. Brenda, sweetheart, my family's lived here since 1962. You plan to find me for my garden shed that's older than you are? Nervous laughter rolled across the crowd. Martha had a point. Half the neighborhood had unauthorized structures older than Brenda's career. But Darius had come prepared. On his lunch break, he'd scoured county records like a journalist with classified clearance. What he uncovered was telling. Brenda's divorce settlement left her solely responsible for a $4,200 monthly mortgage on a home she couldn't sustain. Her real estate commissions had already dropped 30% in the cooling market. She was desperate. And more telling still, her client, Lakeshore Development LLC, formed only 6 months ago under a Delaware shell company designed to hide money trails. I'd like to request a postponement, Darius said evenly, standing in the back. The room turned to him. Proper notice wasn't given for changes this major. State law requires 14 days written notice to all homeowners. Brenda's calm cracked like thin ice. This is an emergency meeting addressing immediate safety issues. What emergency exactly? Darius asked, raising his phone. Mind if I record this? State law only requires one-party consent. I learned that during my divorce. Truthfully, he'd learned it from a paralegal friend. But the bluff landed perfectly. A few residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Tom Bradley, a weathered Vietnam veteran with arms like oak branches, gave a firm nod of approval. Smart thinking, son. Keep them straight. What was expected? To be a routine vote had taken an unexpected turn. Brenda usually bulldozed these meetings with prearranged proxies and a heavy silence that kept dissenters quiet. This time, though, 3 members held back their votes after Darius presented his grandfather's deed, and 2 more began pressing for answers about whether proper procedures had been followed. Motion postponed until official notice is given, declared the board secretary, a meek accountant who seemed to have finally found his backbone. Brenda's polished facade cracked wide open. Fine, but don't fool yourselves into thinking this is finished. She packed up her things with sharp, angry movements. Some of you may want to reconsider whether this community truly matches your lifestyle. As neighbors began filing out, Kyle lingered near the back of the room. He shuffled forward toward Darius with the hesitance of a boy approaching a growling dog. Mr. Mitchell, can I ask you something? Go ahead, son. My mom keeps saying that college money's tied up in some big business deal. She says once these lakefront properties are developed, we'll never have to worry about money again. His voice dropped low. Is she breaking the law? The boy was sharper than his mother gave him credit for. Kyle, I can't give legal advice, but I'll tell you this. When adults start promising you'll never have to worry about money again, that's exactly when you should start worrying. Kyle nodded slowly, treating the words like they were carved into stone. That evening, Martha showed up at Darius's door with a plate of pierogi and news worth far more. The smell of sour cream and onions made his stomach rumble. Comfort food. At its finest. She settled into a kitchen chair. You should know this, she said. Brenda's been making rounds with other lakefront owners. The Kowalskis weren't the only ones. She's been targeting military families, the elderly, anyone she thinks won't push back. How many? At least 6 families over the last 2 years. Every one of them sold below value. Every sale went to the same development firm. Her eyes burned with righteous fury. Your grandfather used to say the lake had a way of washing the trash out. Maybe it's time for a high tide. Darius stored the information carefully. Military intelligence had taught him the difference between coincidence and deliberate action. This wasn't random harassment. It was a campaign. That changed everything. His approach would have to shift. It was time to fight back. Brenda's counterstrike arrived at sunrise, delivered by a jittery private investigator who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. He knocked on Darius's door, clutching a manila folder like it might detonate. Mr. Mitchell, I'm Pete Garrison, private investigator. I've been hired to run a background check on you for pending litigation. He shifted uncomfortably. Standard stuff, nothing personal. Darius pegged him immediately. Former cop, trying to make an honest living in the gray areas. Who's footing your bill, Pete? You know I can't reveal that, Pete replied, though his eyes flicked toward Brenda's house across the water, about as subtle as a billboard. Well, everything you need is in my service record. 30 years, honorable discharge, Bronze Star, Purple Heart. Darius sipped his coffee. Though I'd like to know why anyone would spend good money investigating a decorated veteran. Pete's face cycled through several shades of red. Purple Heart, IED, Kandahar, right? 3 months at Walter Reed? Darius nodded, watching the man's professional shell crumble. You served, Pete? Marines? 95 to 09. Pete's voice carried that reverence Marines reserved for fellow warriors. Sir, with respect, I think I'll be returning. My retainer suggesting my client find a new hobby. By afternoon, Pete proved true to his word. From his kitchen window, Darius watched the man's car pull into Brenda's driveway, sit for 4 minutes, then peel out with squealing tires. Even across the lake, Brenda's furious shouting carried loud enough to disturb the birds, but she wasn't done yet. By evening, she had filed a police report claiming Darius had verbally threatened her at the community mailboxes. The responding officer turned out to be the same young deputy from the earlier noise complaint, Officer Johnson, according to his badge. Mr. Mitchell, I need to ask about an alleged verbal altercation earlier today. What altercation? I haven't left my property except to check the mail around 3. Johnson checked his notepad. Mrs. Whitmore claims you confronted her aggressively and made threatening remarks about making her pay for harassment. Darius nearly laughed. Officer, I said good afternoon and asked if her mail was forwarded correctly. The only threat was her promise to make my life miserable until I moved out. Something in Johnson's expression shifted. Sir, are you Major General Mitchell? The one who spoke at the high school Veterans Day event 2 years back? Guilty as charged. The officer's stance softened. My younger brother was in that audience. Your words about duty and sacrifice. He enlisted the next month because of you. Johnson hesitated, then leaned closer. Off the record, sir, Mrs. Whitmore's name pops up in our system constantly. Noise complaints, harassment claims, suspicious activity reports, always aimed at whoever she's feuding with. That was valuable intel. Darius knew from Afghanistan that local information often outweighed the best satellite imagery. Johnson had just provided key tactical insight. Any advice, officer? Document everything, and maybe invest in a good security system. His radio crackled, pulling him back to duty. Have a good evening, sir, and thank you for your service. Once he left, Darius pulled up his state's Freedom of Information Act portal. Back in the Pentagon, he had learned the power of sunshine. Laws. Legal tools that forced agencies to release public records. In 10 minutes, he filed requests for every police report Brenda Whitmore had submitted in the last 2 years. 2 days later, the results came in. 43 separate reports over 18 months. Noise disturbances, trespassing claims, suspicious activity, verbal threats. The pattern was crystal clear. Brenda had turned the police into her personal weapon. But buried in the reports, Darius spotted discrepancies, contradictions, impossible timelines, and claims that couldn't be verified. Filing false police reports was a misdemeanor in most states. Repeatedly filing them could escalate to a felony. This wasn't just harassment. It was criminal. That evening, Kyle showed up on the dock during his usual jog. The kid's face carried the weight of the secrets too heavy for his age. Mr. Mitchell, I need to tell you something. His voice trembled with the strain of a teenager facing a moral crossroads. My mom has been secretly recording talks with the neighbors. She's keeping files on everyone she labels a problem, including me, especially you. She's trying to put together some kind of case, painting you as a danger to the neighborhood. Kyle's voice dropped to a whisper. She's also been draining my college fund to pay for lawyers and that development deal. I'm supposed to start touring schools next year, but her obsession is stealing my future. That crossed a line Darius could never forgive. Kyle, this stays between us for now, but you did the right thing telling me. From here on, we stop holding back. 3 days later, Kyle showed up at Darius's cabin at sunrise, clutching his phone like it was murder trial evidence. His hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the moral weight of what he was about to share. Mr. Mitchell, I can't sleep anymore. I keep thinking about the families my mom forced out, and now she's targeting you too. His teenage voice cracked under the strain. I recorded something last night. He hit play. On the recording, Brenda's voice came through. First, speaking to someone named Mr. Joseph, her mysterious development partner. The military guy's being stubborn, but I'll deal with him. Same strategy as before. File complaints, stack up fines, make life impossible until he caves. Chen replied, Timeline matters, Mrs. Whitmore. We need those 3 lakefront houses cleared by spring to break ground. Your commission depends on it. Brenda's voice was cold. Don't worry, I've already pushed 6 families out with HOA pressure. 1 decorated veteran won't stop me. The recording went on, revealing how they'd used shell companies to hide Joseph's name, how Brenda twisted HOA rules to target specific groups, and how she split kickbacks with a corrupt county assessor who inflated taxes on unwanted residents. Kyle looked pale as bone. There's more. On her laptop, she keeps spreadsheets, names, addresses, income guesses, what she calls vulnerability factors. Military families, elderly couples, minorities, single parents, anyone she thinks can't fight back. This wasn't random. Harassment. It was organized cleansing dressed up as community improvement. Darius felt his military instincts take over, that calm, cold clarity that came when you recognized enemy tactics. Kyle, this is conspiracy to commit housing discrimination, a federal civil rights violation. I know, I checked the law after I heard it, Kyle said, his voice heavier than his years. My college fund, the money she put into Joseph's company. It's gone, isn't it? Darius couldn't lie. Most likely, these development scams collapse the moment someone starts digging. They sat in silence, watching the sun spill, gold across the lake. Kyle had just realized his mother wasn't merely difficult. She was criminal, a brutal truth for a 16-year-old to face. What do I do now? What your conscience says is right. Kyle nodded slowly, his decision taking shape. I want to help stop her, not just for you, for every family she's hurt. That afternoon, Martha arrived with both bad news and a plate of cookies. The smell of sugar and butter couldn't soften the bitterness of what she carried. Talked to Eleanor Henderson yesterday, Martha said, settling into a porch rocker. She and Jim, the young couple with the baby, are living in a trailer park now, both working 2 jobs just to pay off the legal bills from fighting Brenda. The cost in human lives was staggering. How many others? Darius asked. The Kowalskis are in assisted living, sold their place for half its value, barely affording medication. The Rodriguez family had to move to an apartment in town. Their kids had to change schools. Martha's voice held old pain. 6 families. Destroyed so far. All so developers can build luxury homes on the lake. Darius felt something shift inside him. The same sick realization he'd had in Afghanistan when it became clear civilian deaths weren't accidents, but deliberate targets. This was war crimes in suburbia. Martha, reach out to those families. Tell them there might be a way to fight back. You think so? Federal housing law doesn't set a time limit for ongoing conspiracies. If we prove systematic targeting, based on race, age, military service, Brenda and her developer friend are looking at prison. That evening, Kyle returned with his mother's laptop password and a USB full of files. He had chosen his side. As Darius scrolled through the documents, the full scope came into focus. This wasn't just Riverside Estates. Chen's company was running the same scheme in 3 other lakefront neighborhoods. HOA harassment wasn't a tactic. It was a business model. A criminal machine worth millions in forced property sales. Tomorrow, Darius would start tearing it apart. The hunters were about to become the hunted. The next morning, his cabin turned into a war room. Maps of the lake spread across the table. Legal documents stacked like ammo. His grandfather's old rotary phone buzzed with calls from unexpected allies. Tom Bradley was first to arrive. Vietnam vet cap crooked on his head, thermos of jet fuel coffee in hand. Heard through the grapevine you're taking on the neighborhood. Tyrant, count me in, son. Behind him came others Darius hadn't expected. Eleanor Henderson drove up from the trailer park, box of documents in tow, every harassment letter, every bogus fine, every threatening call Brenda had ever made. She spread them across Darius's table. The bitter smell of burnt coffee rose from her travel mug. We kept everything, she said firmly. Jim thought I was crazy, saving all those violation notices, but something told me we'd need them. And Martha returned again, this time with unshakable determination and a contact list that read like a town census. I called the church group, the senior center's book club, and even my nephew, who works as a paralegal downtown. Word spread quickly. By midday, Darius had assembled what his old sergeant would have proudly called a coalition of the willing Kyle. Sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop open, methodically transferring his mother's files onto encrypted drives with the focused determination only a teenager on a mission could muster. Thankfully, the boy had inherited his father's tech skills. Mr. Mitchell, Kyle said, not lifting his eyes from the screen. I found her client communications going back 2 years. She's been targeting families using what she calls demographic vulnerability assessments. Single moms, seniors, military households coping with PTSD, immigrant families, basically anyone she thought couldn't push back effectively. The system she built is chillingly organized. Darius had witnessed ethnic cleansing efforts in Afghanistan that were less calculated than Brenda's suburban scheme. His phone buzzed. The number was familiar from his Pentagon days. Colonel? Sarah Martinez with military legal assistance returning his call. Darius, good to hear from you, she said. I understand you're running into some housing discrimination problems. Problems? Try a civil rights crisis, Darius replied. Sarah, I'm sending you files that'll make your skin crawl. I've already had the local American Legion Post do a preliminary review. This is systematic, federal level. We're looking at targeting of protected classes, conspiracy to defraud, maybe even RICO if it crosses multiple communities. Her voice carried the kind of satisfaction lawyers get when staring down a case with undeniable villains. I'll connect you with DOJ Civil Rights. They'll eat this up. While Sarah worked her federal channels, Darius organized the local response. Martha's Church Network identified 8 more families across 3 towns who had been forced out using the exact same tactics. The evidence was clear. Chen's group was orchestrating a multi-state operation. Tom Bradley became a key player for veteran outreach. His connections to the American Legion, VFW, and even the local Marine Corps League pulled in support fast. Military families stick together, especially when the bullies wear civilian clothes. From his divorce years earlier, Darius remembered that community organizing worked a lot like military logistics. Same need for clear objectives, solid communications, and people willing to grind through the unglamorous tasks. The only difference was more casseroles, fewer rifles. Eleanor Henderson stepped up as their civilian casualty coordinator, finding displaced families and cataloging their financial losses. From her trailer home, which had better internet than most offices, she tapped into accounting skills she'd picked up at work. Current damages are nearing $2.3 million in forced below-market sales, she reported from her spreadsheet. And that's just from the families we've reached so far. By dinner time, Kyle unearthed the financial smoking gun. Chen's company had been manipulating property tax assessments with help from a corrupt county official, using that leverage to intensify HOA pressure. Look at this, Kyle said, pointing at the monitor. Mom's been emailing a guy named Deputy Assessor Williams. They coordinate the timing. He spikes the taxes right before her harassment starts. Families can't handle both the tax jump and the fines, so they bail. That was straight-up conspiracy to commit fraud, a federal crime with serious prison time attached. Darius felt the grim satisfaction of seeing an enemy's entire strategy unravel under scrutiny. His old commander used to remind him, amateurs focus on tactics, professionals master logistics. Brenda's entire scheme relied on families staying isolated and overwhelmed. But once the community shared information, organized resources, and brought in federal backup, her empire collapsed like a house of cards in a hurricane. By nightfall, they had a coordinated strike plan, simultaneous federal civil rights complaints, ethics charges through the State Real Estate Commission, criminal referrals for fraud and conspiracy, and a petition to oust the HOA board. Timeline? Tom asked, scanning the notes. Federal complaint Monday morning. Real Estate Commission Wednesday. HOA board vote Friday night. That old sense of command surged back in Darius's chest. By next weekend, Brenda's entire operation is finished. Martha lifted her coffee mug. To justice, served with a side of pierogi. Everyone laughed. The kind of uneasy laughter that comes right before a decisive fight. Monday morning brought Brenda's most desperate counterattack yet. A family court filing to have Kyle removed from their home, claiming he was in immediate danger because of his association with unstable military veterans showing concerning behavioral patterns. Kyle found the papers taped to his bedroom door like a cruel parody of an eviction notice. His hands trembled as he read his mother's sworn statement, which painted Darius as a violent, PTSD-scarred veteran who had manipulated my son against me through psychological control. She's completely lost it, Kyle whispered during their emergency call. The hearing's Thursday. She thinks if she gets me out of the house, I can't testify against her. But Brenda had overplayed her hand. Family courts treat false danger claims very seriously, especially when they drag decorated veterans' names through the mud. Her desperation was showing, and desperate moves meant sloppy mistakes. That afternoon, County Inspector Rodriguez called with troubling news. Mr. Mitchell, I need to file a report. Mrs. Whitmore tried to bribe me, offered $2,000 to cite. Your property for septic issues, code violations, whatever I could pin down. Luckily, Rodriguez had been cautious. Their earlier interaction had raised suspicions, so this time he'd worn a wire. The entire exchange was recorded. He was a sharp man, one who had spotted Brenda's game from the start. She had been clear, Rodriguez explained. What she wanted were violations so severe they'd trigger an immediate evacuation. She even hinted at pressure from her developer, client about tight timelines. I've already passed everything to the district attorney's office. Bribery was a felony. Conspiring to commit fraud was a felony. Filing false paperwork with the court counted as perjury, also a felony. With every reckless move, Brenda was stacking up years of prison time. By that evening, she had crossed into outright sabotage. At 2 a.m, Darius's security system caught her on camera, dressed head to toe in black, moving like a wannabe ninja, slicing through his dock lines during a thunderstorm. The night vision video left no doubt. Her face lit up by lightning, bolt cutters in her grip, carefully working to set his floating dock adrift. If Martha hadn't phoned at dawn, the destruction would have been massive. "Honey, your dock's floating toward the spillway. Thought you'd want to know?" It ended up taking 4 neighbors and a borrowed boat to pull the dock back before it was swept over the dam. The sabotage was plain to see, cleanly cut marine rope that could have cost thousands in storm damage if not caught in time. But the hardest blow came that afternoon when Kyle dropped by with news. His mother's attorney had walked away. "She didn't lose him, she fired him," Kyle said, collapsing into a chair at Darius's kitchen table. "I heard the whole call. He told her the case was both legally and ethically impossible, said he wouldn't be part of forging court documents. Losing an attorney on the eve of a federal probe was the legal equivalent of a parachute failing. Mid-jump. Disastrous, with worse to follow. That night, Brenda unleashed her doomsday move. She'd retained a new lawyer, the kind you see in late-night commercials, promising to fight dirty when the system fails you. This one was infamous for scorched earth tactics and a flexible sense of ethics. His strategy was simple: bury Darius, and complaints to every agency imaginable. EPA violations for altering the dock, fish and wildlife citations for disturbing nesting loons, health department complaints about the septic system, fire marshal reports about propane storage. Each one triggered an inspection, drowning Darius in bureaucratic harassment that could tie up his property for months. It was guerrilla warfare fought with paperwork. "She's trying to smother you in red tape," Colonel Martinez explained over the phone that evening. Classic stalling move. If she can mire you in regulatory disputes, she buys time, slows the feds, maybe pressures you into settling quietly. But Brenda had overlooked Kyle. He still had full access to her communications, and he was documenting everything. Every bribed complaint, every fabricated accusation, every fraudulent filing. His archive was basically a handbook for criminal conspiracy. Then came another layer. She'd hired a private investigator named Detective Walsh, a man with ties in county offices. Kyle reported they were syncing complaint filings for maximum disruption, with Walsh advising on which agencies responded quickest and asked the fewest questions. Brenda's corruption circle was growing, but so was the federal case closing in around it. Every new accomplice meant more charges, longer sentences. Wednesday brought the breaking point, Brenda's own. Client, Mr. Joseph, cut ties completely. Kyle intercepted the call when Joseph's lawyer told her federal investigators had contacted their firm about housing discrimination. "This project is terminated immediately," Joseph said flatly. "Our legal department considers you a liability. We can't afford." That night, Brenda's house went dark early. From across the lake, Darius watched through binoculars as she paced in frantic circles, phone glued to her ear, burning through what contacts she had left. Her empire was collapsing, finances gone, allies fleeing, her own son cooperating with investigators. Tomorrow's family court session would be the least of her worries. Martha showed up with coffee and fresh intel. Saw 3 cars leave her driveway today. Looked like lawyers, maybe investigators. Word around town is she's scrambling to file bankruptcy to dodge the federal charges. Too late. Civil rights violations can't be erased in bankruptcy, and criminal charges don't vanish with paperwork. The siege was nearly over. Then, Thursday morning, Brenda tried one last desperate ploy. At 6:47 a.m., she placed a frantic 911 call, her voice shrill with manufactured terror. "I need police right away. The dangerous veteran is threatening my son. He's at our house right now, banging on the door, yelling, 'He'll make me pay.'" The recording later became evidence of perjury, but in that moment, Brenda didn't care about consequences. Officer Johnson responded, finding Darius quietly sipping coffee on his own deck, 200 yards away across the lake. Morning mist rose off the water, proof no one could confuse. His location, "Sir, another complaint from Mrs. Whitmore. She says you're outside her house making threats." Darius gestured at his cameras, their red lights blinking steadily. 8 different angles, all time-stamped. "Haven't left this deck since 5 a.m. Coffee's still warm if you need evidence. I'm not some teleporting ninja," Johnson cracked. A smile. "Sir, this is the 7th false report in 2 weeks. I'm recommending charges for filing fraudulent calls." But Brenda's desperation had turned unhinged. That afternoon, Kyle uncovered her next plot, planning stolen goods on Darius's property. "She's completely lost it," Kyle whispered during a rushed phone call. "She hired a couple sketchy guys from downtown, gave them a laptop, and jewelry she says are stolen. They're supposed to stash them in your shed tonight, then she calls the cops in the morning." It was a laughably amateur setup. Any real investigation would spot the frame-up instantly. But desperate people make reckless choices, and Brenda was drowning in her own lies. Darius coordinated with Johnson to stage a sting. At 11:30 p.m., his cameras caught two men breaking into his shed, hiding a laptop and jewelry box behind some paint cans. The video was perfect. Clear faces, obvious legal activity, all tied straight back to Brenda. Within an hour, Johnson had them in custody. Under questioning, they quickly named Brenda as the mastermind, hoping cooperation might lighten their charges, and then came Kyle's final blow. Friday morning, he handed over proof that Brenda had forged his signature on family court documents. "She signed my name, saying I was scared of you," Kyle admitted, his voice heavy with teenage betrayal. "I handed the documents to my school counselor, who compared the signature with the one on my enrollment records. The difference was obvious. The handwriting didn't even come close. She hadn't bothered to imitate mine. Falsifying court records amounted to perjury, a felony that carried heavy prison sentences. On top of the bogus police reports, attempted bribery, and property damage, Brenda was staring down years in prison." That same afternoon, the financial bombshell landed. Kyle uncovered that his mother had racked up $80,000 in secret debt, including loans against the house that were already coming due. "She took out cash advances against our mortgage," Kyle explained, scrolling through spreadsheets on his laptop. "She used it for legal bills and to sink money into Joseph's development project. It's all gone. The bank starts foreclosure next week." The kid was about to lose both his home and his college fund, collateral damage from his mother's obsession with control. Watching him pay the price for her corruption was gut-wrenching. Still, the community closed ranks around him in ways that stirred something in Darius's military heart. Martha offered Kyle a spare room. Tom Bradley worked on a scholarship fund through the American Legion. Eleanor Henderson guided him through emancipation proceedings to free him from his mother's legal disaster. Friday evening marked the breaking point. Brenda made one last desperate attempt to seize control of the story before it all unraveled. She staged a press conference on her lawn, likely hoping to play the victim of veteran harassment. Reporter Janet Walsh arrived with a crew, expecting a minor HOA scuffle. Instead, she witnessed federal agents hand Brenda a criminal indictment, state regulators stripping her real estate license, and a crowd of displaced families assembling for the community board's removal vote. "Mrs. Whitmore," Walsh called, "do you have a response to the federal housing discrimination charges filed today?" Brenda's face cycled through several shades as it dawned on her that the press conference had morphed into a public arrest. "This is all lies," she snapped. "A conspiracy by unstable veterans and selfish neighbors who don't care about community standards." The sound of handcuffs locking punctuated her denial. Federal marshals had arrived with warrants for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. From Darius's dock, Kyle watched as his mother was loaded into a transport van, her designer. Lakefront outfit looking absurd against the cold reality of federal custody. "Is it wrong that I feel relieved?" he asked softly. "Son," Darius told him, "relief when a nightmare ends isn't wrong. It's human." The following day promised a community vote, media coverage, and the first real step toward justice for the families Brenda had torn apart. But that night, for the first time in months, Clearwater Lake felt peaceful. By Friday evening, the Riverside, the state's community center, resembled a mix between a town hall and a carnival. Word spread quickly through social media, churches, and veterans groups. More than 200 people crowded into a space built for 50, with overflow listeners in the parking lot gathered around portable speakers. Channel 7 set up cameras after Walsh's earlier scoop about the arrests. State legislators sent representatives once the discrimination case hit regional headlines. The parking lot buzzed like a festival, complete with food trucks and vendors selling Justice for Veterans t-shirts. Brenda arrived in shackles, escorted by federal marshals. Though her bond hearing wasn't until Monday, she insisted on being present at the meeting that would strip away her last shred of influence. Jail had left her designer clothes wrinkled, gray roots exposed in her hair, and her eyes wild with the panic of someone watching their empire collapse. Darius entered. In full-dress uniform, his medals gleaming under fluorescent lights. The crowd rose in a standing ovation that thundered for 5 minutes, veterans snapping to attention, civilians clapping until their palms stung. Kyle sat in the front row beside Martha, his choice of allegiance unmistakable. Across the room, his mother locked eyes with him, silently begging for loyalty. Kyle's steady, unyielding gaze told her there would be none. Federal prosecutor Amanda Joseph, no relation to the developer, took the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we filed charges against Brenda Whitmore and her associates for conspiracy to violate federal housing laws, systemic discrimination against protected groups, wire fraud, mail fraud, and racketeering." The crowd's aye, low rumble of approval rolled like distant thunder. District Attorney Michael Rodriguez followed. State charges include bribery attempts, filing false police reports, perjury, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Mrs. Whitmore faces up to 25 years in state prison, unless federal authorities claim jurisdiction first. Brenda's gasp. Third attorney of the week leaned in, whispering urgently, no doubt explaining that her case had gone from bad to catastrophic. Then came the voices of the community. Eleanor Henderson spoke first, steady despite years of grief. Brenda Whitmore. Destroyed my family. We lost our home, our savings, our children's security. My husband worked 3 jobs just to pay legal fees. Tonight, I start getting my life back. Tom Bradley, representing the American Legion, spoke with crisp military precision. She targeted veterans, thinking PTSD made us easy victims. She miscalculated. Military families don't fold to bullies. We organize. 3 more families shared their stories. Elderly couples forced from their homes, young parents bankrupted, veterans harassed simply for serving. Each testimony drove another nail into Brenda's coffin. Finally, Martha unleashed her righteous fury. This woman is a cancer. She turned neighbor against neighbor, destroyed families for profit, and corrupted everything good about living by the lake. Enough. Kyle rose slowly, his teenage voice cutting through the silence. My mom taught me to be honest, to work hard, to treat people right. Then she became someone who broke every one of those lessons. I love her, but I can't stand behind what she's done. His voice cracked, but his resolve didn't waver. Something inside Brenda snapped. Tears spilled, not of guilt, but of rage and self-pity, furious at being betrayed by the very people she claimed to have helped. The night's most cathartic moment came when Officer Johnson addressed Major General Mitchell. Sir, Mrs. Whitmore filed 47 false police reports against you and others. On behalf of the Sheriff's Department, I apologize for not recognizing the pattern sooner. The vote to remove Brenda from the board felt almost anticlimactic. 100. 27 in favor, 8 against, 3 abstaining. Her reign of suburban intimidation ended with the shuffle of paper ballots into a cardboard box. Elections for replacements wrapped in minutes. Martha as president, Bradley as enforcement lead, Henderson as treasurer with a mandate to audit. Every cent from the past 3 years. As marshals prepared to return Brenda to custody, she made one last outburst. You don't get it. I was trying to raise property values, protect standards. Everything I did was legal under HOA authority. Prosecutor Joseph delivered the evening's final blow, her words sharp as a gavel. Ma'am, systematic housing discrimination is not a community management strategy. It was a federal offense. Her so-called community rules had broken. The Fair Housing Act, the Civil Rights Act, and even the most basic standards of human decency. The crowd inside the community center erupted with cheers as Brenda was taken away. Her reign of suburban tyranny had finally ended, brought down by the very neighbors she had tried to destroy. Outside, the evening air carried sounds of celebration, laughter, conversations, and the soft rhythm of lake water brushing against the shore. 6 months later, Clearwater Lake had gone from being a war zone to a true paradise. The crisp mornings carried the sweet aroma of Martha's apple pie cooling on the windowsill, blended with the pine-scented breeze and the earthy crunch of autumn leaves underfoot. On his newly rebuilt dock, Darius sipped hot coffee in the cool air, watching Kyle perfect his fly casting with the focused discipline of a cadet in training. The boy had come a long way from the frightened teen torn between family loyalty and his own conscience. His mother's guilty plea, 8 years in federal prison and $422 million in restitution, had set him free to become the young man he was destined to be. Mr. Mitchell, my West Point acceptance letter came yesterday. Kyle's voice rang, with joy as his cast landed neatly by the lily pads. Interviews next month, but Colonel Martinez says I'm a sure thing. Your bravery during the investigation earned that, son, Darius replied. No academy can teach what you already have. The courage to do what's right when everything is on the line. The transformation of the neighborhood had been nothing short of remarkable. Eleanor Henderson and her family had moved back into a beautiful lakeside cabin bought with restitution funds. Her children finally finding stability after years of upheaval. Tom Bradley's weekly Veterans Breakfast now drew families from 4 counties, turning the community center into a gathering place for friendship and mutual support. Under Martha's new HOA leadership, every harassment-driven policy had been tossed out and replaced with practical guidelines that encouraged true community instead of petty power games. The mediation program she established had already resolved 3 disputes that month alone, neighbors talking through disagreements instead of turning rules into weapons. But the greatest achievement was the Clearwater Veterans Scholarship Fund, financed by Brenda's forfeited assets. The annual fundraiser, highlighted by Grandpa Joe's legendary fish fry, had already raised $85,000 to help military families with education. Kyle was the first recipient. At last month's ceremony, Darius gave a speech that spread across military networks nationwide. My grandfather bought this land in 1944 to build something lasting, not just property, but a community where people look out for one another. That dream survived Hitler, the Cold War, and recessions. It wasn't going to be crushed by some suburban bully with a fancy business card. The 5-minute standing ovation thundered across the entire lake, with veterans traveling from 6 states to show their support. Now Kyle was preparing for his own service, carrying forward the lessons learned during their suburban battle. He understood something many adults never did. Real strength comes from lifting people up, not pushing them down. Darius's phone buzzed with a message from the DOJ. Clearwater was being used as a national training model for prosecuting housing discrimination. Consulting opportunities were opening. Maybe it was time to take the fight nationwide. Martha had already mentioned similar harassment schemes in other lakefront communities across 3 states. Veterans were being targeted by people who mistook honor for weakness. A serious mistake, one that needed to be corrected on a larger scale. Kyle? Darius asked, what do you think about helping other neighborhoods fight back? A kind of traveling justice operation? The boy's grin lit up his whole face. Like Batman, only for HOA bullies. When do we start? That night? The community barbecue filled the air with laughter and the smell of burgers sizzling on Martha's old grill. 3 generations mingled together, founding residents, young military families, and everyone in between. This was the kind of unity Brenda had tried to tear apart. A neighborhood built on respect instead of fear, as the sunset painted the lake. Purple and gold, Kyle approached Darius with a rare seriousness. Mr. Mitchell, I want to major in military law at the academy. Figure I can do more good with a law degree and military training combined? Perfect. The boy had found his calling, shaped through hardship. No longer a victim, but an advocate. He had been transformed by watching adults stand firm under pressure and choose what was right. Later, Darius visited Sarah's grave with updates she would have treasured. Her headstone was surrounded by flowers planted by neighbors, people who had never known her, but understood the power of love and solidarity born from struggle. Mission accomplished, sweetheart. The lake is peaceful again, the kids are on their way to West Point, and the bullies learned never to underestimate military families. Your advice, to protect those who can't protect themselves, was the best guidance I ever got. The call of loons drifted across the water, the same haunting sound his grandfather had loved. Now it echoed over a community reborn through courage, justice, and neighbors willing to fight for one another. Share your HOA nightmare in the comments. Let's help each other stand up to suburban bullies who think they can exploit military families and seniors. Subscribe to HOA Stories for more accounts of ordinary people defeating corrupt systems through community strength, legal know-how, and good old-fashioned American justice. Thanks for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors rise up against HOA. Karens, and karma always comes knocking. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more true neighborhood drama and HOA tales every week.